how you doing? You have a good weekend? There's no way I'll know. Well, I hope you did. Hope you're all doing very well. Hey guys, I think it's going to rain on Thursday. Woohoo! I'm so excited about rain. And so is all nature. I'll tell you, when it does start raining, I'm going to run out there and just get wet. It's going to be wonderful. Anyway, so we're back this week, continuing with C.S. Lewis's classics. We're doing Prince Caspian. We got halfway through last week. We're going to carry on today, obviously. We've got lots of crazy characters and not crazy characters, crazy voices for this show today. So, yeah, it's interesting. Although today's only a few characters. So. I like to make my life interesting. What can I say? Cool. So we're going to jump straight back in. Okay. Prince Caspian. Last Friday we got to halfway through chapter 8 because they're long chapters. 15 chapters, 10 days, 1.5 chapters per day. Cool. Right, so halfway through chapter 8, let me catch you up with what was going on. The Pevensey children, Edmund, Susan, Lucy, and Peter, they were all showing the dwarf Trumpkin that they're badass. We got this, Yeah, they are. And so Peter beat him in a sword fight. Edmund beat him in a sword fight. Edmund did. Susan beat him in an archery competition. And Lucy healed his shoulder fully with her little cordial. Right, so we're going to jump straight back in. He's just going to say, "Thank you, everybody, you're amazing," basically. The children all said it was quite all right, and not to mention it. This is chapter 8, how they left the island, by the way. "And now," said Peter, "if you've really decided to believe in us—" "I have," said the dwarf. "It's quite clear that we have to." Oh, hang on. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh, sorry, I can't read. Yeah. I was just looking at this one line like, "I want for ages, and then I read the word. Anyway. "It's quite clear what we have to do," said Peter. "We must join King Caspian at once." "The sooner the better," said Trumpkin. "My being such a fool has already wasted about an hour." "It's about 2 days' journey, the way you came," said Peter. "For us, I mean, we can't walk all day and night like you dwarves." Then he turned to the others. "What Trumpkin calls Aslan's How is obviously the stone table itself. You remember it was about half a day's march, or a little less, from there down to the fords of Baruna." "Baruna's Bridge, we call it," said Trumpkin. "There was no bridge in our time," said Peter. "And then from Baruna down to here was another day and a bit. We used to get home about tea time on the second day, going easily. Going hard, we could do the whole thing in a day and a half, perhaps." "But remember, it's all woods now," said Trumpkin, "and there are enemies to dodge." "Look here," said Edmund. "Need we go by the same way that our dear little friend came from?" "No more of that, your majesty. If you love me," said the dwarf. "Very well," said Edmund. "May I say our DLF?" "Oh, Edmund," said Susan, "don't keep on at him like that." "That's all right, lass. I mean, your majesty," said Trumpkin with a chuckle. "A jibe won't raise a blister." And after that, they all called the dwarf the DLF, till they'd almost forgotten what it meant. "As I was saying," continued Edmund, "we needn't go that way. We should. Well, why shouldn't we row a little till we come to the Glasswater Creek, and row up it? That brings us up behind the hill of stone, the stone table, and we'll be safe while we're at sea. If we start at once, we can be at the head of Glasswater before dark, get a few hours' sleep, and be with Caspian pretty early tomorrow morning." "What a thing it is to know the coast," said Trumpkin. "None of us knows anything about Glasswater." "What about food?" asked Susan. "Oh, we'll have to do with apples. Make do with them," said Lucy. "Don't let's get on. We've done nothing yet. We've been here nearly 2 days. And anyway, no one's going to have my hat for a fish basket again," said Edmund. They used one of the raincoats as a kind of bag and put a good many apples in it. That'll give them diarrhea. Then they all had a good long drink at the well, for they would meet no more fresh water till they landed at the head of the creek, and they went down to the boat. The children were sorry to leave Cape Paravel, which even in ruins had begun to feel like home again. "The DLF had better steer," said Peter, "and Ed and I will take an oar each. Half a moment, though. We'd better take off our mail. We're going to be pretty warm before we're done." The girls had better be in the bows and shouting direction to the DLF because he doesn't know the way. You'd better get us a fair way out to sea till we pass the island. And soon the green wooded coast of the island was falling away behind them, and its little bays and headlands were beginning to look flatter, and the boat was rising and falling in the gentle swell. The sea began to grow bigger around them, and in the distance, bluer, but closer on the boat, it was green and bubbly. Everything smelled salty, and there was no noise except the swishing of water and the clop-clop of water against the sides of the splash of the oars, and the jolting noise of the rowlocks. The sun grew hot. It was delightful for Lucy and Susan in the bows, bending over the edge and trying to get their hands in the sea, which they could never quite reach. The bottom, mostly pure, pale sand, but with occasional patches of purple seaweed, could be seen beneath them. "Oh, it's like the old times," said Lucy. "Do you remember our voyage to Terebinthia, and Galma, and Seven Isles, and the Lone Islands?" "Yes," said Susan. "And our great ship, the Splendor Hyaline. Oh, with the swan's head at her prow, and the carved swan's wings coming back almost to her waist. And the silken sails, and the green stern lanterns, and the feast on the poop, and the musicians. Do you remember when we had the musicians up in the rigging playing flutes, so that it sounded like music out of the sky?" Presently Susan took over Edmund's oar, and he came forward to join Lucy. They had passed the island now and still stood closer into the shore, all wooded and deserted. They would have thought it very pretty if they had not remembered the time when it was an open and breezy and full of merry friends. "Phew, this is pretty gruelling work," said Peter. "Can't I row for a bit?" said Lucy. "The oars are too big for you," said Peter shortly, not because he was cross, but because he had no strength to spare for talking. Chapter 9. What Lucy Saw. Susan and the two boys were bitterly tired with rowing before they rounded their last headland and began the final pull of Glasswater itself. And Lucy's head ached from the long hours of sun and the glare on the water. Even Trumpkin longed for the voyage to be over. The seat on which he sat to steer had been made for men, not dwarves, and his feet didn't reach the floorboards, and everyone knows how uncomfortable that is even for 10 minutes. And as they all grew more tired, their spirits fell. Up till now the children had only been thinking of how to get to Caspian. Now they wondered what they would do when they found him, and how a handful of dwarves and woodland creatures could defeat an army of grown-up humans. Twilight was coming on as they rode slowly up the winding of Glasswater Creek. A twilight which deepened as the banks grew closer together and the overhanging trees began almost to meet overhead. It was very quiet in here, as the sound of the sea died away behind them. They could even hear the trickle of the little streams that poured down from the forest into Glasswater. They went ashore at last, far too tired to attempt lighting a fire, and even a supper of apples, though most of them felt they'd never wanted to see an apple again. The supper of apples seemed better than trying to catch or shoot anything. After a little silent munching, they all huddled down together in the moss and dead leaves between 4 large beech trees. Everyone except Lucy went to sleep at once. Lucy, being far less tired, found it hard to get comfortable. Also, she'd forgotten till now that all dwarfs snore. She knew that one of the best ways of getting to sleep is to stop trying, so she opened her eyes. Through a gap in the bracken and branches, she could see just a patch of water in the creek and the sky above it. Then, with a thrill of memory, she saw again, after all those years, the bright Narnian stars. She had once known them better than the stars of our own world, because as a queen in Narnia she had gone to bed much later than as a child in England. And there they were. At least 3 of the summer constellations could be seen from where she lay: the ship, the hammer, and the leopard. "Dear old leopard," she murmured happily to herself. Instead of getting drowsier, she was getting more awake, with an odd nighttime dreamish kind of wakefulness. The creek was growing brighter. She knew now that the moon was on it, though she couldn't see the moon. And now she began to feel that the whole forest was coming awake like herself. Hardly knowing why she did it, she got up quickly and walked a little distance away from the bivouac. "This is lovely," said Lucy to herself. It was cool and fresh. Delicious smells were floating everywhere. Somewhere close by she heard the twitter of a nightingale beginning to sing, then stopping and beginning again. It was a little lighter ahead. She went towards the light and came to a place where there were fewer trees and whole patches or pools of moonlight, but the moonlight and the shadows so mixed that you could hardly be sure where anything was, or what it was. At the same moment, the nightingale, satisfied at last with his tuning up, burst into full song. There's a picture. Hoi! Ugh. Lucy's eyes began to grow accustomed to the light, and she saw the trees that were nearest to her more distinctly. A great longing for the old days when the trees could talk in Narnia came over her. She knew exactly how each of these trees would talk, if only she could wake them, and what sort of human form it would put on. She looked at a silver birch. That's my tree. It would have a soft, showery voice and would look like a slender girl, with hair blown all over her face and fond of dancing. That's where my surname comes from, Birch. She looked at the oak. He would be a wizened but hearty old man with a frizzled beard and warts on his face and hands, and hair growing out of the warts. She looked at the beech under which she was standing. Ah, she would be the best of all. She would be a gracious goddess, smooth and stately, the lady of the wood. Oh, trees, 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 said Lucy, though she had not been intended to speak at all. Oh, trees, wake, 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 don't you remember it? Don't you remember me? Dryads and hamadryads, come out, come to me. Go on, here's another picture. Have a look, see. Sorry if it's not the best quality. It's a massive book, as you can see. Though there was not a breath of wind, they all stirred about her. The rustling noise of the leaves was almost like words. The nightingale stopped singing, as if to listen to it. Lucy felt that at any moment she would begin to understand what the trees were trying to say, but the moment didn't come. The rustling died away. The nightingale resumed its song. Even in the moonlight, the wood looked more ordinary again. Yet Lucy had the feeling, as you sometimes have when you're trying to remember a name or a date, and almost get it, but it vanishes before you really do, that she'd just missed something, as if she'd just spoken to the trees a split second too soon or a split second too late, or used all the right words except one, or put in one word that was just wrong. Quite suddenly, she began to feel tired. She went back to the bivouac, snuggled down between Susan and Peter, and was asleep in a few minutes. It was a cold and cheerless waking for them all next morning, with a grey twilight in the wood, for the sun had not yet risen, and everything damp and dirty. Apples, hey-ho, said Trumpkin, with a rueful grin. I must say, you ancient kings and queens don't overfeed your courtiers. They stood up and shook themselves and looked about. The trees were thick, and they could see no more than a few yards in any direction. I suppose your majesties know the way all right, said the dwarf. I don't, said Susan. I'd never seen these woods in my life before. In fact, I thought all along that we ought to have gone by the river. Then I think you might have at least... Hang on a second. Then I think you might have said so at the time, said Peter, with pardonable sharpness. Oh, don't take any notice of her, said Edmund. She's always a wet blanket. You got that pocket compass of yours, Peter, haven't you? Well then, we're as right as rain. We've only got to keep on going northwest, cross that little river, the what you call it, the Rush. I know, said Peter. The one that joins the big river at the fords of Baruna, or Baruna's Bridge, as the DLF calls it. Yeah, who's talking? That's right, cross it and strike uphill, and we'll be at the stone table, Aslan's How, I mean, by 8 or 9 o'clock. I hope King Caspian will give us a good breakfast. I hope you're right, said Susan. I can't remember all that at all. Ah, that's the worst of girls, said Edmund to Peter and the dwarf. They never carry a map in their heads. Sexist, Edmund. That's because our heads have something inside them, said Lucy. Aha! She showed him. At first, things seemed to be going pretty well. They even thought they'd struck an old path. But if you know anything about woods, you'll know that one is always finding imaginary paths. They disappear about 5 minutes, and then you think you find another, and hope it's not another but more of the same. And it also disappears, and after you've been well lured out of your right direction, you realise that none of them were paths at all. The boys and the dwarf, however, were used to woods, and were not taken in for more than a few seconds. They plodded on for about half an hour, 3 of them very stiff from yesterday's rowing, when Trumpkin suddenly whispered, Stop! They all stopped. There's something following us, he said in a low voice. Or rather, something keeping up with us. Over there on the left. They all stood still listening, and staring till their ears and eyes ached. You and I'd better each have an arrow on the string, said Susan to Trumpkin. The dwarf nodded, and when both bows were ready for action, the party went on again. They went a few dozen yards through fairly open woodland, keeping a sharp lookout. Then they came to a place where the undergrowth thickened and they had to pass nearer to it. Just as they were passing the place, there came a sudden something that snarled and flashed, rising up from the breaking twigs like a thunderbolt. Lucy was knocked down and winded, hearing the twang of a bowstring as she fell. When she was able to take notice of things again, she saw a great grim-looking grey bear lying dead, with Trumpkin's arrow in its side. A great grim-looking grey bear. Great grim-looking grey. Almost as a tongue twister, but not. The DLF beat you in that shooting match, Sue. I can't read any of Peter's lines today. Never mind, said Peter, with a slightly forced smile. Even he had been shaken by this adventure. I left it too late, said Susan in an embarrassed voice. I was so afraid it might be, one of our kind bears, a talking bear. She hated killing things. That's the trouble of it, said Trumpkin. Well, most of the beasts have gone enemy and gone dumb, but there are still some of the other kind left. You never know, and you daren't wait to see. Poor old Bruin, said Susan. You don't think he was? Not he, said the dwarf. I saw the face and I heard the snarl. He only wanted little girl for his breakfast. And talking of breakfast, I didn't want to discourage your majesties, but when you said you hoped King Caspian would give you a good one, well, but meat's precious scarce in the camp, and there's good eating on a bear. He'll be ashamed to leave the carcass without taking a bit, and it won't delay us more than half an hour. I dare say you two youngsters, kings, I should say, know well how to skin a bear. Let's go and sit down far off, says Susan to Lucy. I know what a horrid messy business that will be. Lucy shuddered and nodded. When they'd sat down, she said, Such a horrible idea has come into my head, Sue. What's that? Wouldn't it be dreadful if some day in our own world, at home, men started going wild inside, like the animals here, and still look like men, so that you never know which are which? We've got enough to bother about here and now in Narnia, said the practical Susan, without imagining things like that. When they rejoined the boys and the dwarf, as much as they thought they could carry the best meat had been cut off. Raw meat is not a nice thing to fill one's pockets with, but they folded it up in fresh leaves and made the best of it. They were all experienced enough to know that they would feel quite differently about these squashy and unpleasant parcels when they'd walked long enough to be really hungry. On they trudged again, stopping to wash 3 pairs of hands that needed it in the first stream they passed. They walked on until the sun rose and the birds began to sing, and more flies than they'd wanted were buzzing in the bracken. Excuse me. Not calm that fire. The stiffness from yesterday's rowing began to wear off. Everybody's spirits rose. The sun grew warmer, and they took their helmets off and carried them. I suppose we are going right, said Edmund, about an hour later. I don't see how we can go wrong as long as we don't bear too much to the left, said Peter. If we bear too much to the right, the worst that can happen is wasting a little time by striking the great river too soon and not cutting off the corner. And again they trudged on with no sound except the thud of their feet and the jingle of their chain shirts. Where's this ballyrush got to? Said Edmund a good deal later. I certainly thought we'd have struck it by now, said Peter, but there's nothing to do but keep on. They both knew that the dwarf was looking anxiously at them, but he said nothing. And still they trudged on, and their mail shirts began to feel very hot and heavy. What on earth? Said Peter suddenly. They'd come, without seeing it, almost to the edge of a small precipice from which they looked down into a gorge with a river at the bottom. On the far side the cliffs rose much higher. None of the party, except Edmund, and perhaps Trumpkin, was a rock climber. I'm sorry, said Peter. It's my fault for coming this way. We're lost. I've never seen this place in my life before. The dwarf gave a low whistle between his teeth. Oh, do let's go back and go the other way, said Susan. I knew all along we'd get lost in these woods. Susan, said Lucy reproachfully, don't nag at Peter like that. It's so rotten, and he's doing all that he can. Even if it is pathetic. No, she didn't say that. Sorry. And don't you snap at Sue like that either, said Edmund. I think she's quite right. Oh, tubs and tortoise-shells, exclaimed Trumpkin. If we got lost coming, what chance have we of finding our way back? And if we're to go back to the island and begin all over again, even supposing we could, we might as well give the whole thing up. Miraz will have finished with Caspian before we get there at this rate. You think we ought to go on? Said Lucy. I'm not sure the High King is lost, said Trumpkin. What's to hinder this river being the Rush? Because the Rush is not a gorge, said Peter, keeping his temper with some difficulty. Your Majesty says is, replied the dwarf. But oughtn't you say it was? You knew this country hundreds, maybe thousands, years ago. Maybe it has changed. A landslide might have pulled off half the side of that hill, leaving bare rock. And there are your precipices beyond the gorge. Then the Rush might go on, deepening its course year after year, till you get the little precipices this side. Or there might have been an earthquake or anything. I never thought of that, said Peter. And anyway, continued Trumpkin, even if this is not the Rush, it's flowing roughly north, and so it must fall into the great river anyway. I think I passed something that might have been it on my way down. So if we go downstream, to our right, we'll hit the great river. Perhaps not so high as we'd hope, but at least we'll be no worse off than if you come my way. Trumpkin, you're a brick, said Peter. Come on then, down this side of the gorge. What does that mean, you're a brick? I'll build a house with you, Trumpkin. Look, cried Lucy. Where, what, why, how, said everyone. The lion, said Lucy. Aslan himself, didn't you see? Her face had changed completely, and her eyes shone. Do you really mean, began Peter. Where do you think you saw him? Asked Susan. Oh, don't talk like a grown-up, said Lucy, stamping her foot. I didn't think I saw him. I saw him. Where, Lou? Asked Peter. Right up there, but between those mountain ashes. No, this side of the gorge. And up, not down. Just the opposite of the way you want to go. And he wanted us to go where he was, up there. How do you know that was what he wanted? Asked Edmund. I just know, said Lucy, by his face. The others all looked at each other in puzzled silence. Oh, Peter. We have 2 more columns and then we're finished for today, okay? Her Majesty may well have seen a lion, put in Trumpkin. There are lions in these woods, I've been told, but it needn't have been a friendly and talking lion any more than a bear was friendly and a talking bear, innit? Oh, don't be so stupid, said Lucy. Do you think I don't know Aslan when I see him? Well, he'd be pretty elderly by now, said Trumpkin, if he's the one you knew when you were here before. And if it could be the same one, what's to prevent him having gone wild and witless like so many others? Lucy turned crimson, and I think she would have flown at Trumpkin had Peter not laid his hand on her arm. The DLF doesn't understand. How could he? You must just take it to Trumpkin that we do really know about Aslan. A little bit about him, I mean. And you mustn't talk about him like that again. It isn't lucky, for one thing, and it's all nonsense for another. The only question is whether Aslan was really here. But I know he was, said Lucy, her eyes filling with tears. Oh, you can't see it. All that work... Oh, your face is all wet now. Yes, Lou, but we don't, you see. We don't know that he was here, Peter means. There's nothing for it but a vote, said Edmund. All right, replied Peter. You're the eldest, DLF. What do you vote for, up or down? Down, said the dwarf. I know nothing about Aslan, but I do know if we turn left and follow the gorge up, it might lead us all day before we find a place where we could cross it. Whereas if we turn right and go down, we're bound to reach the great river in a couple of hours, and if there are any real lions about, we want to go away from them, not towards them. What do you say, Susan? Don't be angry, Lou, said Susan, but I do think we should go down. I'm dead tired. Do let's get out of this wretched wood into the open as quick as we can. And none of us, except you, saw anything. Edmund, said Peter. Well, there's just this, said Edmund, speaking quickly and turning a little red. When we first discovered Narnia, a year ago, or 1,000 years ago, whichever it was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us would believe her. I was the worst of the lot, I know. Yet, she was right all along. Wouldn't it be fair to believe her this time? I vote for going up. Oh, Ed, said Lucy, and seized his hand. Yeah! And And now it's your turn, Peter, said Susan. And I do hope... Oh, shut up. Let a chap think, interrupted Peter. I'd much rather have to not vote. You're the High King, said Trumpkin sternly. Down, said Peter after a long pause. I know Lucy may be right after all, but I can't help it. We must do one or the other. So they set off to their right along the edge downstream, and Lucy came last of the party, crying bitterly. Oh, it's so sad. Why don't they listen to Lucy? Why? Chapter 10. We've reached chapter 10 tomorrow to find out. One of these days I'm going to do that and snap my face in it. Oh! Cool. Right, well, take care of yourselves, won't you? And I'll see you tomorrow at 5:30 if you want to join in live for the story. Cool. Have a good night.